Franz Liszt was not only a virtuoso pianist and a magnificent composer, he's known as a musical superstar. Why? Because it has always been said by the biographers that Franz Liszt was a very tall and handsome man, being at least 6 feet 1 inches tall. And Alan Walker, in a biography about Franz Liszt, said that Liszt's hands were long and narrow and did not have webbing between the fingers. This allowed him to take wide stretches with comparative ease. Because his fingertips were blunted rather than tapered, they gave maximum traction across the surface of the keyboard. Another physical advantage for Liszt was that his 4 fingers were unusually flexible, and this made it easier for him to play shimmering textures with several things going on inside the same hand simultaneously. Biographer Alan Walker also said, "The Grand Duke of Weimar once told Busoni, Liszt was what a prince should be. Pianist, composer, teacher, conductor, writer, and musical administrator. He enlarged everything that he touched. And through his many benefactions and gifts to others, he advanced the dignity of the profession." We hope you will enjoy our unit on Franz Liszt. Today's story is about Hungarian composer Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt was actually born in a small town in Rheiting, Austria. Austria is right next door on the map to Hungary, and the two countries enjoyed cooperative relations many years, also during the time that Franz Liszt was alive. Franz Liszt said himself, "I am Hungarian and know no greater pleasure than to present honorably the first fruits of my development and education as an initial offering of the most sincere affection and gratitude." And he was talking about his native Hungary. Legendary Russian pianist and composer Anton Rubinstein said, "Liszt is the first poet of his people in music who embodied the fine Hungarian folk tunes in the brilliant, ingenious forms of his Hungarian Rhapsodies." The Hungarian Rhapsodies is a set of 19 piano pieces based on Hungarian folk themes that were composed by Franz Liszt during 1846 to 1853 and later in 1882 and 1885. And he incorporated popular tunes and rhythms that were characteristic of the Hungarian gypsies. And he created classical compositions based on Hungarian gypsy folk music. The Hungarian gypsy folk music boasted so much of what we know as improvisation, and that is where you get a basic idea in music, and then it is up to the performer to create very interesting variations based on that basic melody. And so Franz Liszt was a master at improvisation. As a matter of fact, when he was 9 years old and performed concerts and recitals, he would always end the program with an improvisation at the very end. Let's talk a little bit more about the life of Franz Liszt as a young person. Now to our story. A little dust-covered village in Hungary presented the world with a divine gift. One of its native sons, Liszt Ferenc, as he was called in the Hungarian way, started from this humble place to fill the world with the wonder of his genius. Liszt's father, a Hungarian nobleman and a gifted amateur musician, was delighted when he detected early signs of musical ability in his son, Franz. The child was fragile and suffered much from nervous pains and fevers. Once, during a spell of the painful fever, little Franz collapsed. The disconsolate parents thought that their 3-year-old darling was dead and ordered a coffin for him. Fortunately, he revived and was destined to live a long and happy life and to compose and perform the music that we still enjoy today. For many years, however, the sick spells recurred, but Franz outgrew them by and by. Franz was 6 years old when he listened one day to his father playing a concerto on the piano. Adam Liszt, his father, was an accomplished pianist and quite absorbed in the music that he was playing. Later in the evening, little Franz strolled into the house from the garden where he had been romping and began to sing. To the immense amazement of his father, the little boy sang the concerto that Adam Liszt had been playing in the afternoon. "What are you singing, my son?" his father asked him. "I don't know," Franz replied. "Well, sing it over again," said Mr. Liszt. Franz obligingly repeated the piece. After this incident, Adam Liszt began to teach his son to play the piano. From time to time, the studies were interrupted for long periods by attacks of the fever. During his studies, little Franz was not particularly fond of practicing the tedious etudes. Instead, he passionately liked to pick out melodies for himself on the piano. He progressed so rapidly that at the age of 9, he was fit to play in a public concert in the nearby town of Sopron. The child's performance was astonishing. Soon afterward, he played in the larger city of Poznan, and here too, he startled the audience with his brilliant performance. 6 music-loving Hungarian aristocrats immediately offered to sponsor Franz for serious musical studies. Mr. Liszt accepted the offer and soon afterward moved with his wife and Franz to Vienna. Serious music lessons were immediately started under the best teacher. Franz progressed rapidly. Soon, he could not find pieces difficult enough to practice. He could play the most difficult compositions at first sight and was always searching for something hard enough to play that would need real practicing to be mastered. The desire to become a concert virtuoso first awakened in the child when he heard the famous Hungarian gypsy virtuoso János Bihari. This brilliant violinist gave concerts in Vienna and enchanted Franz with the deep melancholy and the wild fire of his performance. Franz Liszt's Hungarian rhapsodies reflect the impression that János Bihari made on the little boy's musical mind. Through his long career, full of homage paid to his genius, no sign of appreciation ever meant more to Franz Liszt than Beethoven's embrace and kiss after the boy's first concert in Vienna. Well, you see, Beethoven did not care for child prodigies, and for years he had hardly attended any public function. But he had heard such wonderful reports of the second Mozart that against his habit, he went to Liszt's first concert. The child knew that the master of masters, Ludwig van Beethoven, was present. Franz Liszt's teacher, Karl Czerny, and his father, Adam Liszt, were very nervous. They were afraid that the child would be embarrassed by the presence of the great musician. But Franz, though an unspoiled, modest child, was so sure of himself in the matter of playing the piano that the admired master's presence did not intimidate him at all. To the contrary, The 11-year-old boy was inspired to the utmost exertion of his genius. At the end of the concert, the audience was in a frenzy of delight. In the midst of the turmoil, Beethoven walked up to the platform and embraced and kissed the happy child. It was like a benediction. Concerts in Germany and Paris followed, with repetition of the success in Vienna. At his concerts, the piano always had to be placed in a position where the whole audience could watch the wonder child play. People would not have believed that a mere child was producing that heavenly music if they had not seen the wonder with their own eyes. Franz was 12 years old when the management of the Paris Opera commissioned him to write an opera and performed it as soon as Franz had finished that work. Like Mozart, Franz Liszt, too, was gifted and celebrated and admired by royalty, as well as by other music lovers during his concert tours throughout many countries. While the world admired him as one of the wonders of his time, Franz continued to be an unspoiled child. But a child indeed. Franz was about 12 years old when he once played for the Duke of Orleans. The later King Louis Philippe was so charmed by his performance that he asked the child to select whatever gift he wished. Franz pointed with glittering eyes to a plaything hanging amid dangling treasures on the wall. "This Harlequin, please," he asked, as any other boy would. Now, a Harlequin was a masked kind of creature that looks much like a clown, wearing a diamond kind of pattern outfit. And in those days, that was a preferred gift for boys and girls to want to have. Throughout all his life, Liszt was utterly indifferent to money and worldly possessions. He enjoyed them only as far as they permitted him to help and to serve others. During his phenomenal career as a concert pianist, Liszt was a musical missionary. He made it his task to play works of composers whose genius he'd recognized before the world knew of them themselves. During his phenomenal career as a concert pianist, Liszt was a musical missionary. He made it his task to play works of composers that he recognized as genius before the world had recognized them. At the height of his fame, he decided to withdraw from the world and settle in Weimar in Germany as conductor of the Ducal Orchestra. He was 38 years old when he stopped playing the piano for money. From that time on, Franz Liszt devoted himself chiefly to composition and teaching. As he refused to play any more at concerts for money, so he also refused to take money from his students. Franz Liszt was the greatest piano virtuoso of all ages, but this is not his only distinction. As a composer, too, he belongs to the first rank. His creative genius has enriched the musical treasure of the world with new forms in composition. He was the first to compose symphonic poems and rhapsodies. He even wrote other songs that accompanied poems and songs that interpreted poems, such as his 3 Liebestrom, which are songs set to words. Franz Liszt coined the English word recital, which has become a standard musical expression of the English language. Because before Franz Liszt was on the stage as a magnificent virtuoso performer, many performers used their musical scores as they played. But Franz Liszt had such a brilliant mind that he was able to memorize all of his music, and he performed recitals, and that lifted the standard for everyone who has come since Franz Liszt, because the standard now is to have your music memorized. Liszt was also unsurpassed as a teacher. The most brilliant pianists considered themselves so fortunate if he accepted them as a student. Liszt's almost superhuman unselfishness and generosity became well known. His friends and pupils considered him to be a saint. But if he was a saint, he was a very human one, as he liked humorously to point out when people embarrassed him with praise. Franz Liszt had 3 children, and their mother was Marie de Gaulle. The names of his 3 children were Blandine, Cosima, who became the future wife of Hans von Bülow, and later Richard Wagner, who was also a well-known composer. And he had 1 son whose name was Daniel. And there's an interesting story that you might like to know. Marie de Gaulle was a very prolific writer, but in those days, women did not use their own names because it wasn't socially acceptable for women to be writers. And so Marie wrote her works under the name of Daniel Stern. And coincidentally, she named her son Daniel. There's another little known story about Franz Liszt, and he jokingly would tell the story, as we have been told, that he was about 9 years old and his mother took him for a visit to Whitsuntide to the neighboring village called Nyack. He said, "We stopped at the teacher's house. Mr. Haller was his name. Oh, I can still see the room and crowd of people. And there was a lovely little girl, too. She had beautiful curly hair, and more important, she had a beautiful red egg. The little girl and I sat on the floor and played with the red egg. We rolled it around on the floor back and forth. But the grown-ups wanted me to play on the piano. My mother and Mr. Haller and the guests kept pestering me. 'Franzo, do play for us. Please play.' 'I cannot do it,' I answered curtly, and rolled the red egg back to the little girl. The grown-ups continued to ask me to play, and I stubbornly repeated, 'I can't do it.' The grown-ups continuously asked me to play, and I stubbornly repeated, 'I cannot do it.' At last I got annoyed and said, 'All right, I will play for you if you will give me the red egg.' Mr. Haller promised me the egg, and I played. So you see, I was a selfish little rascal who would not play except for a reward." "Well," said one of the friends, "did you get the red egg?" "Now that is another question," said Liszt. "The little girl did not want to give up her red egg. Her father coaxed her and finally bought it from her for a piece of cake, 10 cherries, and a shiny new monetary coin." "Oh, so you got the egg," said the friend, satisfied that Liszt had gotten his reward. "I'm sorry to say that I did not," said Liszt laughingly. "The little minx took the piece of cake, the cherries, and the monetary coin, but she also kept the red egg." I hope you've enjoyed this story about Franz Liszt and the life of one of the greatest musical composers who ever lived. Please take a moment to go to our performances section on the website and listen to music that was composed by Franz Liszt. Bye for now. This story was taken from various sources. Great Musicians as Children, written by Franziska Schwimmer, which was published by Doubleday and Company, Incorporated. This book is from our archives, and it was published in 1929. Also, some of the facts came from a compilation of notes by Dr. Marion Conti from the Juilliard School in a course about Franz Liszt.